You think betrayal from strangers is painful. Try being blindsided by the people who raised you. I spent 5 years silently paying the mortgage on my parents' house, thinking I was doing the right thing, being the good daughter. Then, at my sister's wedding, in front of hundreds of guests, they handed that very house to her as a gift. No warning, no conversation, just applause and champagne. That was the moment something broke. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about limits. About finally drawing the line where no one ever thought you would. And once that line is crossed, nothing is ever the same again. The late spring sun was dipping low as Claire Emerson and her husband David arrived at the Fairview Country Club. The venue was glowing with fairy lights, laughter, and elegance. Claire, in a navy new cocktail dress, clutched a cream envelope holding a $10,000 check, their wedding gift to her younger sister Sophie. It was generous, sure, but Claire didn't mind. Sophie was her only sibling, and David's job in investment banking, paired with her role as a marketing director, meant they could afford to be generous. Still, something inside Claire felt off. As they entered the reception area, she spotted her parents, Maggie adjusting Robert's tie while he playfully grumbled. They looked radiant, genuinely, effortlessly happy in a way Claire couldn't remember them being at her own wedding 5 years ago. Back then they'd been polite, distant, nothing like this. The ceremony went off without a hitch. Sophie glowed in her white gown, Lucas beamed at her, and Claire tried her best to stay in the moment. She sat between David and her parents, sipping champagne, nodding at jokes, all while suppressing a gnawing ache she couldn't name. Then came the speeches. Maggie gave thanks to everyone for attending. Robert chimed in with heartfelt words about Sophie being the brightest light in their lives. Then Maggie pulled out a stack of papers. As a special wedding gift, she announced, we're giving Sophie and Lucas the family home on Green Hill. The room erupted in applause. Sophie cried tears of joy, clearly not from surprise. Claire froze. That was the house she had been paying the mortgage on for the past 5 years. No one had asked her. No one had warned her. She looked at David. He reached for her hand. She forced a smile. Then, in a low voice, she leaned toward him. Can we go now? The road back home was quiet. The night wrapped around the car like a secret too heavy to speak aloud. Claire stared out the window as streetlights flashed across the windshield, each one dragging a memory behind it like a splinter under the skin. She remembered her college graduation. Maggie and Robert had handed her a card with $50 and a half-hearted smile. 2 years later, Sophie's graduation was marked by balloons, a catered lunch, and a brand new car with a ribbon on top. Claire had clapped and smiled, but inside, something had cracked. Her 21st birthday dinner was cancelled because Sophie had a volleyball game. Not a championship, just a regular match. Claire spent that night eating takeout alone, telling herself it didn't matter. Her own wedding? They arrived late, stayed just long enough for photos, and left before the cake was cut. David drove in silence, his hand resting gently on her thigh. He didn't need to ask what was wrong. He already knew. Claire finally broke the silence. I'm not mad about the house, she said quietly. It's not the money. It's not even the surprise. I'm mad because they never once saw me. Not really. I've been paying that mortgage for 5 years and still, somehow, I'm invisible. David glanced at her, his jaw tight with anger, but his voice stayed soft. You're not invisible to me. Claire gave him a sad smile, but the ache in her chest didn't ease. Not yet. 3 weeks later, Claire and David arrived at the Green Hill house, now Sophie and Lucas's home, for a family dinner. The invitation had come under the guise of a welcome-back meal after their honeymoon, but Claire suspected otherwise. For the first time in years, she rang the doorbell instead of using a key. Sophie greeted them, all smiles, ushering them into the living room where Maggie and Robert waited. Dinner smelled like roast beef and nostalgia. The table was set like it always used to be, but Claire couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing beneath the surface. They ate. Sophie relived every sun-kissed detail of Hawaii. Lucas added the occasional joke. Maggie smiled, Robert chuckled, and Claire just moved her fork around her plate. Then, as dessert was being served, Maggie cleared her throat. "Claire, there's something your father and I wanted to talk to you about." Robert nodded slowly. "Now that Sophie and Lucas are settled here, we thought it'd be best if your mother and I move into the cabin." "Pine Ridge?" Claire blinked. "Excuse me?" "It just makes sense," Maggie said quickly. "It's a quiet place, and we wouldn't be in anyone's way." Claire sat straighter. "You mean the house I bought? With my own savings?" Robert shifted. "Well, yes." Claire's voice dropped, calm, controlled, deadly. "That's not going to happen." Maggie's smile faltered. "Claire, don't be cruel. We're your parents." "You gave away the house I've been paying for without telling me," Claire replied. "Now you want to take the only place that's truly mine? No." Sophie scoffed. "You've always been so jealous, so territorial. It's exhausting." Claire stood, slow and deliberate. She met Sophie's eyes without blinking. "If protecting what I built makes me selfish, then so be it." She folded her napkin, placed it beside her untouched plate, and turned to David. "We're leaving." It was past midnight when Claire's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She glanced at the screen. Motion detected. Pine Ridge cabin. Her heart dropped. With trembling fingers, she opened the security app and pulled up the live camera feed. There they were. Maggie and Robert, her parents, standing outside the cabin, dragging suitcases across the porch like they belonged there. Seconds later, the phone rang again. "This is Officer Rhea Carter with the Vermont State Police. We're responding to a triggered alarm at Pine Ridge Cabin. 2 individuals claim to be family. Do they have your permission to be there?" Claire's voice was steady. "No, they do not. That's unauthorized entry." She ended the call, already reaching for her coat. David didn't need to ask. He was grabbing the car keys. They drove into the night, headlights slicing through the fog, Claire silent in the passenger seat. She stared out into the darkness, eyes dry but burning. The betrayal was no longer subtle, no longer wrapped in guilt or obligation. This was a violation, an invasion. Her boundaries hadn't just been tested, they'd been shattered. David broke the silence only once, glancing over at her pale, tight-lipped face. "You okay?" Claire didn't look at him. Her voice was cold, distant. "They've crossed the line, David, and I'm done pretending they haven't." By dawn, they pulled up to Pine Ridge Cabin. A police cruiser idled in the gravel driveway. Claire stepped out first, her heels crunching over frostbitten leaves. Maggie and Robert sat on the front steps, surrounded by their luggage. A thermos in Robert's hand trembled slightly. One officer greeted Claire, clipboard in hand. They used a key, no forced entry, but no authorization either. "This is my property," Claire said. "I told them they weren't welcome." The officer nodded. "We won't press charges, but we'll file a formal warning. They'll need to leave today." Maggie sobbed loudly. "Claire, please. We didn't know where else to go." Robert looked at the ground. He hadn't met her eyes once. Claire stayed calm. "I'll pay for a temporary rental, 1 month. After that, you're on your own." She made arrangements for a modest unit at Mapleview Apartments, paid the first month, and handed the keys to the officer, not a word more. As she and David drove away, she glanced at the cabin in the rearview mirror. Her chest tightened. Home was supposed to mean something safe, something sacred. David reached over. "You okay?" Claire stared ahead. One tear slipped free. "I just realized I've never really had a home." Monday night. Claire sat in her dimly lit apartment catching up on emails when a notification pinged from Facebook. She almost didn't click it, but then she saw her mother's name. Maggie's post was long, emotional, manipulative. "Today I learned what it feels like to be abandoned by your own child. My husband and I, in our golden years, were cast out by the one we gave everything to. We were left with nowhere to go, treated like strangers in our own family. I never thought I'd have to choose between pride and begging my daughter for a place to stay." Attached was a photo of Robert sitting on the porch at Pine Ridge, bags around him, looking frail. Claire recognized the moment. It had been cold that morning. Her father's coat was zipped all the way up. The post exploded. Comments poured in. How could she do this to you? That girl always was ungrateful. Artless, just heartless. Private messages flooded in, some cruel, some threatening. Friends she hadn't spoken to in years shared the post, judging, condemning. David tried to console her. Ignore them. You don't owe anyone an explanation. But Claire sat at her desk, opened her laptop, and stared at the blank document for a long time. Then she whispered, "If they want this to be public, let's make it public." Claire sat at her laptop, the cursor blinking like a dare. She took a breath and began to write. No venom, no dramatic punctuation, just facts. She explained how she had paid the mortgage on the Green Hill house for 5 years when her parents couldn't afford it. How she had quietly contributed a third of Sophie's wedding expenses. How Pine Ridge Cabin had been bought with her own money, saved over years of working weekends and skipping vacations. How Maggie and Robert had never asked, only assumed. And how Sophie had clearly been part of the plan from the beginning. Claire hadn't abandoned anyone. She had simply refused to be used again. When she hit post, she didn't expect anything, but within an hour, the tide began to shift. Comments appeared, first tentatively, then in waves. "I didn't know this. I think we owe Claire an apology." "Wow, this changes everything." Private messages trickled in, old friends, distant cousins, saying they were sorry for judging too soon, for believing the first story they heard. That night, her phone rang. It was Jessica, her cousin. "Claire, you won't believe this. Aunt Maggie and Uncle Robert showed up at Sophie's. She wouldn't let them in. Said she and Lucas needed their space." Claire said nothing for a moment, then offered a small, tired smile. She looked at David across the room and said quietly, "They chose Sophie. But Sophie? She made her choice too." Mapleview Apartments smelled like reheated takeout and disinfectant. The walls were grey, the light dim. Robert sat by the window most days, staring at nothing. Maggie barely spoke anymore. She worked nights now, reception at a local clinic. It was the first time in decades she'd held a job where she wasn't in charge. She came home sore, silent, older than she'd ever seemed. Sophie didn't visit. Lucas answered the phone when Maggie called. His voice was polite but cold. "Sophie's busy," he always said. One evening, alone in the quiet, Maggie pulled out an old photo album. Page after page of family moments passed. Birthdays, school plays, beach trips. Then she came to Claire's wedding. There she was, Claire, in a simple white dress, standing next to David. Her parents weren't beside her. Maggie squinted. Had they even stayed for the reception? She leaned closer to the photo. Claire's smile was soft, but her eyes... Those eyes looked like someone already grieving. Robert's voice broke the silence. "I think... we got it wrong, Maggie. We got it wrong a long time ago." Maggie didn't answer. She just stared at that picture of a daughter she had never truly seen. The voicemail came late, just past 10. Claire stared at her phone as the message played. Maggie's voice was low, raspy, almost fragile. "Claire, I know I was wrong. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know. I see it now. I see what we did." Claire sat still, phone pressed to her chest, tears in her eyes, but they didn't fall. She didn't call back, not yet. David found her in the living room, silence thick between them. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded. "I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done carrying it." A week later, Claire signed the contract for her first book. The title was bold, Family, The Place That Heals or The Place That Bleeds. You dry. The editor asked if it was memoir. Claire simply said, "It's what I know." She returned to Pine Ridge Cabin one morning, alone. The place was still, peaceful. She walked through the rooms slowly, breathing in the quiet. Sunlight spilled through the windows, warming the wooden floors. Claire stood in that glow, her hands in her pockets, her shoulders unburdened. For the first time in years. For the first time, she didn't feel guilty for choosing herself. She felt free. The bookstore in downtown Fairview smelled of old pages and cinnamon from the cafe in the back. Golden leaves swirled outside the window as Claire sat at a small table near the front signing copies of her new book. The line was modest: friends, former colleagues, a few curious readers who had followed the story as it unfolded online. David stood nearby, chatting with guests, keeping the energy light. Claire smiled politely, wrote personalized notes, thanked each person by name. Then, near the end of the event, she saw her. Sophie. Uninvited, unannounced. She wore a long coat, a low baseball cap, her eyes hidden behind dark glasses. She said nothing, just stepped into line like any other stranger. When it was her turn, she slid a copy of the book forward. Claire looked up. Their eyes met for the briefest second. No anger, no apology, just recognition. Claire signed the book without a word. Sophie accepted it, tucked something between the pages, and walked out without looking back. When the event was over, Claire flipped open the copy Sophie had held. A folded note peeked out, written in familiar, uneven handwriting. "Maybe you were always right. I just didn't want to admit it." Sophie. Claire stared at the words. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She closed the book gently and set it aside. Weeks later, Pine Ridge Cabin had new life. Claire rented it as a retreat space, the income funding a non-profit she founded, helping women who, like her, had been hurt not by strangers, but by the people who were supposed to love them most. One autumn afternoon, she sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the light gold and soft across her face. David handed her a blanket and joined her on the steps. "For the first time in my life," Claire said, voice calm, steady, "I feel free." Sometimes the hardest love is the kind that lets go, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. Because family isn't just who shares your name, it's who honors your boundaries, sees your worth, and stands beside you when it's hardest, not just when it's easy. Healing doesn't always come from fixing what's broken. Sometimes it comes from walking away and choosing peace over permission. If this story moved you, leave a comment, hit follow, and subscribe for more. Your voice matters here.